The year was 2145, and space had never felt emptier than it did for Dr. Lam Min as he stared at the blinking red light on his console. Station Lumiere, silent for 20 years, had just broken its radio silence with the most haunting message humanity had ever received from the void: we are not alone. Dr. Min, head of the Planetary Alliance's Deep Space Investigation Unit, felt his breath catch in his throat as the SOS signal repeated on a loop, each iteration sending chills down his spine. The massive space station had been humanity's pride, a gleaming testament to their expansion into the cosmos, positioned in Earth's geostationary orbit, like a metallic jewel against the star-spangled darkness. Now, it hung there like a ghost ship, its corridors a maze of shadows and secrets. "Commander," called out Engineer Tra Mai from her station, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she analyzed the incoming data. "Life support systems are still operational, but I'm not detecting any human signatures aboard the station. No heat patterns, no movement, nothing." Lieutenant Colonel An, the deputy team leader, crossed his arms and fixed Dr. Min with a steely gaze. "With respect, Doctor, this feels like a trap. 20 years of silence, and suddenly they're calling for help. Something's not right here." Dr. Min understood Anne's concerns. They were military after all, trained to see threats where scientists saw mysteries. But the pull of discovery, the need to understand what had happened to the 47 crew members, who had vanished without explanation, burned stronger than caution in Min's heart. "Advisor Hui is breathing down our necks from Earth," Anne continued, his voice tight with frustration. "He wants a report within 72 hours, regardless of the risks involved. The Alliance is treating this like a public relations opportunity, not a potential catastrophe." Dr. Min felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like lead. 20 years ago, he had been just a junior researcher when Station Lumiere had gone dark. He had watched the news reports, seen the families of the missing crew members weeping on television, and had sworn then that if he ever had the chance, he would find answers. Now that chance stood before him as terrifying as it was tantalizing. "We're going aboard," he decided, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Tra, Mai, prepare the shuttle, and ready the boarding team. Whatever happened on that station, we need to know. Those people deserved better than to simply disappear into the void." The journey from their research vessel to Station Lumiere took 3 hours. 3 hours during which Dr. Min stared out the shuttle's viewport at the approaching structure. It was beautiful even now, a spinning wheel of metal and glass, its corridors radiating outward, like the spokes of a cosmic bicycle wheel. Solar panels glittered like scales on its outer hull, and docking bays yawned open, like mouths frozen mid-scream. As they approached the main docking bay, Dr. Min noticed something that made his stomach lurch. The bay doors were open, but the magnetic field that should have contained the atmosphere was flickering weakly, like a dying heartbeat. "That field won't hold much longer, Tra," Mai observed, her voice tense. "Whatever's keeping it running, it's on its last legs." The moment their shuttle's airlock cycled open, they were hit with the smell. Not the sterile, recycled air of a functioning station, but something else. Something organic and wrong, like flowers, left to rot in a sealed room. Dr. Min forced himself to breathe through his mouth as they stepped into the station proper. The corridors of Station Lumiere were a study in contrasts. Emergency lighting cast everything in a hellish red glow, while the main illumination systems flickered, sporadically creating dancing shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. Their footsteps echoed in the empty hallways, each sound seeming to carry too far, lasting too long. "Doctor," Anne whispered, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. "Look at this." They had reached what had once been the main control center, and Dr. Min felt his blood run cold. The command consoles were partially destroyed, not by violence or explosion, but as if they had been consumed. Metal surfaces showed signs of corrosion, Unlike anything Dr. Min had seen before, creating organic-looking patterns that spiraled outward from central points like frozen whirlpools. Tra Mai managed to activate one of the partially functional terminals, her fingers flying over the corroded controls. "I'm accessing the station's logs," she reported, her voice strained. "Doctor, these readings, they don't make sense. According to this, the crew was here until 3 days ago." "That's impossible," Anne snapped. "The station's been silent for 20 years. "I know what's impossible," Trey Mai shot back. "But I also know how to read a computer. Look at this crew rotation schedules, meal, preparation logs, even personal diary entries, all dated within the last week." Dr. Min leaned over her shoulder, scanning the data with growing unease. The log entries were there, time-stamped and apparently authentic, but something about them felt wrong. The language was too formal, the reports too perfect, like someone or something had tried to recreate human communication, but had missed the essential randomness of genuine human interaction. "There's something else, Tra." Mai continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Internal security cameras recorded movement in sections 7 through 12 just 6 hours ago. But the figures in the footage, Doctor, they're blurry and indistinct, like shadows moving independently of whatever might be casting them." Lieutenant Colonel Ann had heard enough. "We're leaving, now. This isn't a rescue mission anymore. It's a recovery operation for a virus alien presence or worse. We report back to the Alliance and recommend orbital bombardment." "No," Dr. Min said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "We can't leave without answers. Those crew members, they were people with families, with lives. And if something here poses a threat to Earth, we need to understand it before we can combat it." Anne's face flushed with anger. "Understanding gets people killed, Doctor. Sometimes survival means accepting that some questions shouldn't be answered." Their argument was interrupted by a sound that made all three of them freeze, a gentle humming, almost like a lullaby echoing through the station's communication system. The melody was beautiful, hauntingly familiar, yet Dr. Min couldn't quite place where he had heard it before. That's for Elise." Tra Mai breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Someone's playing Beethoven." The music grew louder, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dr. Min felt compelled to follow it, his feet moving of their own accord, down a corridor he hadn't noticed before. The walls here were different, smoother, almost organic, as if the station had grown, rather than been built. "Doctor, wait." Anne called after him, but Dr. Min was already too far ahead, drawn by a curiosity that felt larger than himself. The music led him to what had once been the station's botanical garden, a vast greenhouse dome that had provided fresh air and food for the crew. Now it was a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and impossible plant growth. Vegetation had run rampant, but it was wrong leaves that shimmered like oil roots that pulsed with their own heartbeat, flowers that seemed to turn and follow his movement. And in the center of this corrupted Eden stood a figure. At first glance, it appeared to be a woman in a station uniform, her back turned to Dr. Min, as she tended to one of the alien plants. But as she began to turn, Dr. Min realized with mounting horror that she wasn't entirely solid. Her form flickered like a bad hologram, and through her translucent skin, he could see patterns of light moving like bioluminescent veins. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate in Dr. Min's bones. "This place is for transformation now, for becoming." Dr. Min's scientific mind raced, even as terror paralyzed his body. "Who are you? What happened to the crew?" The figure smiled, and her face shifted features, rearranging themselves like water. "I am the crew. We are the crew. We are something more now, something integrated. The visitors from beyond came not to destroy, but to enhance, to evolve." "Visitors," Dr. Min managed to croak. "They drift between the stars, seeking suitable hosts. Your species. We are so wonderfully adaptable, so creative. They don't destroy, they incorporate. They learn. and in return, they offer transcendence. As she spoke, more figures emerged from the twisted garden shadows with human shapes, but wrong proportions faces, that shifted between familiar and alien movements that defied physics. Dr. Min recognized some of them from the crew photographs he had studied before the mission. Captain Williams, Engineer Rodriguez, Dr. Anderson, all there but changed, evolved into something that made his mind recoil. "You could join us," the being that had once been human continued. "The fear would stop, the loneliness, the constant struggle against entropy. We could show you wonders beyond imagination, perspectives beyond the limited scope of individual existence." Dr. Min backed away, his hand reaching for his communicator. "And try my code red. Get to the shuttle." The garden erupted into motion. The plant life reached for him with tendrils that moved too fast while the shadow figures glided forward with liquid grace. Dr. Min ran, his boots pounding against metal flooring that seemed to shift and writhe beneath his feet. Behind him, he could hear them calling, their voices a harmonious chorus that spoke of unity, of belonging, of an end to human suffering, through absorption into something greater. It was terrifying how tempting it sounded. He found Anne and Tra-Mai in the control room, frantically downloading what data they could, while preparing portable charges to destroy sensitive equipment. "The whole station is compromised," Dr. Min gasped, fighting to catch his breath. "The crew, they're still here, but they're not human anymore. Something from space, some kind of parasitic entity, has integrated with them." Tra-Mai's face had gone pale. "Doctor, I've been analyzing the station's biocontainment readings. There are trace amounts of an unknown organic compound throughout the atmosphere. We've been breathing it since we came aboard." The implications hit Dr. Min like a hammer. "How long do we have?" "Unknown," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But the process seems to accelerate with extended exposure. The log entries suggest the crew began reporting changes within 48 hours of first contact. Lieutenant Colonel Ann's military training kicked in. Then we set charges and evacuate. This station becomes a tomb." "Wait," Dr. Min said urgently. "There might be a way to stop this. The station's biocontainment systems are still partially functional. If we can overload the atmospheric processors, create a purge cycle, we might be able to sterilize the environment." "And what about the entities?" Anne demanded. "What about the crew?" Dr. Min felt a weight settle in his chest. "I don't think they're the crew anymore. I think there's something wearing the crew's memories, their personalities, like clothing." The lights in the control room suddenly dimmed, and the temperature dropped noticeably. Through the viewports, they could see shapes moving in the corridors, graceful flowing forms that seemed to dance between states of matter. "They know we're here," Tra-Mai whispered. "They're coming." And drew his weapon, though Dr. Min doubted conventional arms would be effective against entities that seemed only partially bound by physical laws. "How long to initiate the purge?" 10 minutes minimum, Tra-Mai replied, her hands flying over the controls. "But I need access to the main environmental console, and that's in Sector 9. "That's halfway across the station," Anne pointed out grimly. "I'll go," Dr. Min volunteered. "You two focus on preparing the shuttle for immediate departure." "Like hell," and snapped. "We stick together. That's how we survive this." They moved through the station like commandos, and taking point while Tra-Mai and Dr. Min followed close behind. The corridors had changed since their arrival. Walls that had been metal now showed organic patterns, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with some kind of energy field. More disconcerting were the sounds, not quite human speech, but close enough to be recognizable as communication. The entities were talking to each other, coordinating, hunting. They reached Sector 9 without incident, finding the environmental control room exactly as the station schematics indicated. But as Tra-Mai began working on the console, they realized they weren't alone. The walls around them began to pulse with a soft, bioluminescent glow, and the very air seemed to thicken. Dr. Min felt a pressure in his mind, like someone gently probing the edges of his consciousness. Why do you resist? The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that might have been wind through the station's ventilation system, or might have been something speaking directly into their thoughts. We offer perfection, an end to isolation, to misunderstanding, unity of purpose, unity of being. Because, Dr. Min said aloud, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the entities or trying to convince himself, humanity isn't meant to be perfect. Our flaws, our struggles, our individual perspectives, that's what makes us who we are. You cling to limitation. The voice responded, tinged with what might have been sadness. You choose suffering over transcendence. Anne raised his weapon as shadows began to coalesce around them, taking on vaguely human forms. How much longer, Traumai? 2 minutes, she called back, sweat beading on her forehead as she worked. The entities moved closer, and Dr. Min could see faces within the Shadow's crew members he recognized from the station records, but changed, idealized, stripped of the small imperfections that made them human. Their eyes held an alien compassion, a terrifying kindness. "We remember you, Dr. Min," one of them said, and he realized with a shock that it was Captain Williams, or what had been Captain Williams. "You studied our work, our mission logs. You wanted to understand us. We can give you that understanding, complete, perfect understanding." "I understand enough," Dr. Min replied, backing toward the console where Traumai was working. "I understand that you're not them anymore." The entity's expression shifted, showing a hurt that seemed genuinely human. "We are more than we were. Why can't you see the gift we offer?" "Done, Tra," Mai shouted, her hand hovering over a final control. "Atmospheric purge in 30 seconds. Everyone to the emergency airlocks." They ran, the entity's cries of disappointment and anger echoing behind them. The station shuddered as the purge cycle began, air rushing through the corridors, with hurricane force carrying with it clouds of sterilizing gas. They made it to the nearest emergency airlock, just as the purge reached maximum intensity. Through the porthole, Dr. Min watched as the organic growths throughout the station withered and dissolved, the bioluminescent patterns fading to nothing. But then, something went wrong. The purge system, overtaxed by the modifications needed to combat the alien contamination, began to overload. Warning lights flashed throughout the station, and the deck beneath their feet vibrated ominously. The main reactor, Traumai, set her face pale as she read her portable scanner. "The purge drew too much power. It's going critical." "How long?" Anne demanded. "Maybe 5 minutes before cascade failure. The explosion will be visible from Earth." Dr. Min felt despair wash over him. They had failed instead of saving the station, and finding answers they had turned it into a bomb, floating in Earth's orbital space. "There's a manual override, Tra." Mai continued, her voice small. "Someone would have to reach the reactor control room and initiate an emergency shutdown. But the radiation levels, whoever goes won't be coming back." Anne straightened, his face set with grim determination. "I'll go." "No," Dr. Min protested. "This is my responsibility, my mission." "Your mission is to survive and report back," Anne corrected him. "That's an order, Doctor." Before Dr. Min could argue further, Lieutenant Colonel Anne was gone, sealing the airlock behind him and heading deeper into the dying station. Through their communicators, they could hear his progress, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the echo of his footsteps, the occasional curse, as he navigated around collapsed sections and radiation hotspots. "Reactor room in sight," his voice crackled through static. "Beginning manual shutdown sequence." Dr. Min watched through a porthole as sections of the station went dark, power being systematically diverted and contained. Anne's sacrifice was working. The cascade failure had been stopped, the reactor stabilized. But then the communication cut out, and the detector in Traumai's hands began clicking rapidly as radiation levels spiked. "He did it," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He saved us all." They made it back to their shuttle with minutes to spare, launching just as the remaining automated systems began shutting down non-essential sections of the station. As they flew away, Dr. Min looked back at Station Lumiere, now a darkened hulk drifting in space, its secrets apparently buried with its crew. But as they departed, Mai made a discovery that sent chills down Dr. Min's spine. "Doctor, I managed to download the station's final logs during the purge. Look at this." The data stream showed the last moments of the entity that had been Captain Williams, recorded by the station's internal sensors. As the sterilizing gas reached her, the creature's form dissolved, but not entirely. Something remained, a cluster of microbial organisms that survived the purge, drifting in the station's air recycling system. "The biological sample containers in our shuttle," Dr. Min realized with growing horror. "We were exposed. What if some of those organisms—" Mai checked her scanner, then checked it again. "Traces of unknown biological matter detected in our atmospheric system. Dormant, but present." Dr. Min stared at the readings, then at his own hands. Were they already changing? Would they carry this contamination back to Earth? The weight of responsibility crushed down on him like a collapsed star. But then, he remembered Anne's sacrifice, the crew's final message, the peaceful look on the entities' faces as they dissolved. Perhaps these organisms weren't purely malevolent. Perhaps they were just alien, trying to survive and propagate in the only way they knew how. "We quarantine ourselves," he decided. "Full isolation protocol. We transmit our data to Earth, but we don't return. Not until we understand what we're carrying." Mai nodded slowly. "We might be the only ones who can study this threat from the inside. Or the only ones who can learn to coexist with it," Dr. Min added, thinking of the entity's words about evolution and transcendence. As their shuttle entered a stable orbit far from both Earth and the station, Dr. Min began composing his report. He wrote about courage and sacrifice, about the unknown dangers lurking in the void, and about the crew of Station Lumiere who had paid the ultimate price for humanity's reach toward the stars. But he also wrote about possibility, about life, finding ways to exist in forms humanity had never imagined, about the complex questions of identity and consciousness that the entities had embodied, and about the need for caution tempered with understanding. The final lines of his report read, "The universe is vast and full of wonders and terrors beyond our comprehension. Station Lumiere stands as a monument to both human ambition and human sacrifice. We must remember that in our quest to understand the cosmos, we may discover that the cosmos is also seeking to understand us. The question that remains is whether such understanding must always come at the cost of what makes us human." Dr. Min sealed the transmission and sent it toward Earth, then settled back to wait. Around him, the shuttle's life support systems hummed quietly, recycling air that might contain the seeds of humanity's next evolutionary step or its extinction. In the distance, Station Lumiere continued its eternal orbit, dark and silent once more. But sometimes, when Earth's rotation brought it into the right alignment, observers would swear they could see lights moving within its corridors, as if something still stirred in the depths of that cosmic tomb. The SOS signal had stopped, but the station's message continued to echo across the void. We are not alone. And perhaps, in the end, that was the most important discovery of all, even if it came with a price that humanity was still learning to count. Dr. Min closed his eyes and tried to sleep, but his dreams were filled with visions of dancing shadows and offers of perfect unity. When he woke, he found himself humming for Elise, though he couldn't remember learning the melody. Outside the shuttle's viewport, the stars continued their ancient dance, keeping secrets that mortals were perhaps never meant to know, yet somehow always destined to discover. In the quiet moments between sleep and waking, Dr. Min sometimes wondered if the entities had been right. Perhaps evolution wasn't always a choice. Perhaps it was simply inevitable, like entropy itself, a force of nature that couldn't be stopped, only delayed. But for now, humanity remained human, flawed and isolated, and wonderfully, terrifyingly individual. And Dr. Min would spend the rest of his life ensuring it stayed that way, even if that life proved to be shorter and stranger than he had ever imagined possible. The void stretched endlessly in all directions, full of mysteries yet to be uncovered and entities yet to be encountered. And somewhere in that vast darkness, other signals waited to be heard. Other stations spun silently through space. Other crews faced choices between remaining human and becoming something more. The universe was patient. It could wait for humanity to decide what it wanted to become. After all, evolution was never a race, it was simply a journey toward an unknown destination, taken one careful step at a time. But as Dr. Min finally drifted off to sleep, he couldn't shake the feeling that their shuttle was being watched, that something vast and benevolent and utterly alien was observing their little craft with the same curiosity that had driven humanity to the stars. And in his dreams, he heard whispers of welcome, of acceptance of a future where the boundaries between self and other, between human and alien, between individual and collective, would dissolve like morning mist before the dawn of a new and stranger day. The SOS signal might have ended, but the conversation between humanity and the universe had only just begun.